Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Farhan Firdaus, co-founder and president of Volunteer Singapore. Nice to see all of you here today. Now, before I begin, I would just like to ask you a simple question. What do you make poverty to be? What does poverty mean to you? Well, poverty is defined as a condition of having little or no money. So now that we're clear about what poverty is, have you ever thought that if poverty exists in Singapore? Now, can I have a show of hands? How many of you here think that poverty exists in Singapore? Show of hands. Wow, I didn't expect this much. Okay, so a lot of you agree that poverty exists. Now, what if I told you that poverty in Singapore does not exist? This is something I know that many people think, but this is not true. It exists because we have about 60,000 poor people in Singapore, and this is according to information by the authorities. Well, I'm here today to debunk this myth. I want to create the awareness of the social problems in Singapore, including poverty, because many of us are unaware of the social issues and are oblivious to these social problems. Now, unless these social issues are made clear, it would be very difficult to rally people to give their time, support, and money to help the unfortunate. My purpose is also to encourage and convince our youths, including all of you here today, to volunteer actively to help enhance and change the fate of our needy and the underprivileged in Singapore. Well, personally, for me, the issue of poverty and social problems are quite clear. As I was exposed to it, was quite acquainted with it since I was quite small. Because my dad was an active volunteer, and usually he frequented many nursing homes and charities. Whenever he went, he would drag me along as well. Would I say he would bring me along as well? So little did I know that my own personal encounter with poverty, after experiencing it for myself, would be the main reason for me to start Volunteer Singapore, to rally our youths to live a life of giving and to help the underprivileged. So I was first acquainted with poverty at the age of 12, and that was when I was a young boy. So my dad brought me in on a fateful day to volunteer at a mosque, and this was during the religious festival for the Muslims. It's called the Hari Raya Haji, right? So Hari Raya Haji is basically a festival whereby the Muslims would slaughter, or would I say sacrifice, sheep and cows, with the primary objective of donating majority of this meat to the needy, people who need, who need this help. So I started volunteering, and it was quite an unconventional volunteering activity for me, because I saw myself at the age of 12, much like these two kids here, right? I was wrestling sheep, right? Not your regular volunteering activity. I was corralling them, bringing them to the person who will be slaughtering them. I was a little bit like the angel of death, right? And then after which, I would be putting their carcasses on the wheelbarrow and bringing them to the various sections where the wool will come out, and then they get their bodies chopped and all that. Now, I shouldn't go into the details, okay? We've got kids here, okay? So, but I think what I really enjoyed from, what I really learned, basically, from this volunteering activity was at the end of the process, when I was bagging these pieces of meat, making sure that it weighed about 1 kilo and giving to the people who really needed them. And what I realized, especially for a young boy, that was very important, was that, people who experience poverty comes from very diverse backgrounds. And the learning point for me was that no act of kindness that we do would ever be too small. Many a times we downplay the impact of the actions that we give. We always badger ourselves, and so this was a kind of lesson for me. And basically I learned that it's the thought that counts, and every little bit makes the difference. So, 4 years on, poverty that I've come to know had hit hard on my middle income family. So this happened during the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis in '98. So that was when my dad suffered a stroke. So he couldn't move, and I suddenly became in charge of the house. He had a lot of illnesses, And he was staying in hospital for about, he had to go in and out of hospital for about 1.5 years. So you can imagine the hospital bill chalked up, and we got a shock when we saw a 6-figure hospital bill. So he lost his job soon after that, and my mom became the sole breadwinner. And it was very difficult for us to tide over, this period, because whatever that she brought home was never enough. Once we paid the bills, there was nothing left, even to pay school fees, to have meals on the table. It was very difficult for us, and even we never celebrated birthdays for many, many years, and also during festivals, we never celebrated as well, because there was never enough money. So that was when I had to work during the nights. I was working as a kitchen helper for many years, and this was when I was sitting for my national exams. So I worked just to put food on the table, because I think my siblings were also quite small, aged about 4 and 6. So it was a very harsh lesson for me, and for me that anyone, including myself, could become poor if tragedy hit unexpectedly. So thankfully, with the help of the community, we managed to get out of this. But I would say that what I did to really come out of this poverty situation was that I think I learned this word called meritocracy, right? So I realized that, hey, I'm in this situation. How do I get myself out? So I kept looking at all the bursaries and the merit scholarships and whatever. So whatever that my school offered, and as long as there's money, I would work very hard to chalk up my grades and just to get that money and pay my debts. So that was how I learned. Now, fast forwarding to the present, I was reminded about the pain and suffering my family went through during our time of need. And I met this man. His name is Mr. Salim, right? He's a frail 73-year-old man. So he knocked on my door at the place where I'm volunteering in my community. And it was during the fasting month of Ramadan. Now, the fasting month for the Muslims is a period where the Muslims would start fasting at about 6 a.m. and then they will break their fast at about 7 p.m., 7-ish. And what happened was he knocked my door at 8, and I opened the door and I saw him. He's quite a familiar face because he would, ask for help time and again, here and there. But this time I was asking him, hey, what are you here? So the thing was, he was asking me, do you have sugar? So I was like, sugar? I mean, it's 8 p.m. and you're asking me for sugar? So I was just shaking my head. So the thing was this, Mr. Salim was asking for sugar because he explained that he did not have money to, despite fasting for about 12 hours or so, he didn't have money to break fast, he didn't have any food, and he was just asking for sugar to make coffee for him and his wife. So when I asked him, okay, so how about tomorrow, breakfast? Then he said, for us, we live by the day. So tomorrow is another day, then I would just deal with it. So, it really left me with a heavy heart. So I decided, I gave him more than he needed in terms of rations, and I gave him some money from my own pocket. So, but I really wanted to know more about the difficulties that he was facing. So I had to sit down with him and ask him what is his problems. And I think I managed to uncover more. He mentioned that he was basically living in he doesn't have a home, a roof over his head, and he was living in a one-room flat with 5 to 6 family members. Basically, he would live there until his relatives would chase him out, and it doesn't belong to him. And basically, the food that he eat, because he can't cook, so he has to eat all the instant noodles and stuff like that. Very unhealthy. Then he mentioned that he has a grandson. So, and he said that his grandson is about 5 to 6 years old. And, the boy couldn't go to K1, K2, kindergarten, because they don't have money, despite, paying only about $20 or $30 per month. So after saying that, I thought to myself, this little boy, Mr. Salim's grandson, if he went to primary school, because, being ill-equipped, not having foundation in education, if he moved on, and later going on to secondary school, usually cases like him, they would fall out of education, and there will be dropouts. And I was very worried for him. So it was clear then that generational poverty had occurred. Now, because Mr. Salim was a low-income earner, his family members, his children, all of them were either earning zero or low income, and also, and it has perpetuated for many years. So it occurred that this vicious cycle will continue, and if we don't do anything to help people like him, this will just perpetuate. So it is unfortunate that this happens to Mr. Salim, and it is very saddening to know that he lives day by day not having a roof over his head, as well as thinking about putting food on the table is a constant problem for him. I'm sure there are many others like him. So my first-hand and personal encounters with poverty had been a major reason for me to form Volunteer Singapore. Now, Volunteer Singapore is a non-profit and youth volunteer organization established in 2012. We exist to encourage and empower youths to help change our social landscape and make a difference in the lives of people who need help, who basically need help the most. We do so by providing volunteering opportunities to all youths, both youths who are keen to volunteer on an ad hoc basis as well as on the long-term basis. And this way, everyone can volunteer their time to help the poor and vulnerable. We also mentor youth volunteer leaders who are keen to make a difference in society. So what they do is they solve community problems. It's usually a 2 to 3 month project. Now, back to poverty. So this myth that poverty does not exist has been debunked. So what do you think caused most people to think that poverty does not exist? Well, I think that Singaporeans have a misconception about poverty. They still think that, to be poor, one has to be living on the streets, one has to wear torn and tattered clothes, and one has to beg for a living and not have belongings like TV, fridge, handphone, etc. Well, this is a common misconception. Now, I have a story. I had one donor come up to me recently and say, "Hey, Fahan, I'm going to pledge a 5-figure sum for you to help the underprivileged." So I asked him, "So Andy, what are your requirements?" His requirements, what he mentioned was basically things that resemble a third world problem. So basically what I've just mentioned, like living on the streets, not having tiles on the floor, etc. And he basically mentioned that if we couldn't find beneficiaries who were needy enough according to his standards, then he would bring the money overseas. Now this is a big problem, and it dawned upon me, and it is a realization that our mindset of poverty has to change now, because poverty is relative. So poverty still exists, but poverty has evolved. Since Singapore has moved from a third world to first nation, so has its social problem. Now, first world problems are not just a hashtag, right? I mentioned that we have first world problems. I'm glad you got the joke, okay. I'm not very good at telling jokes. So I mentioned that we have first world problems, and of course that doesn't include your phone at home, not being able to buy your branded goods, or even not eating at your favorite restaurant. Now, if we, my friends, don't actively help the needy, they may form the social underclass. The low or zero income of parents may lead to a poor start in education for their children. And because of this lack of motivation to study, the kids may drop out and become youths at risk, susceptible to negative influences like shoplifting, drug abuse, joining teen gangs, and the list goes on. These teens will grow up in a negative environment, and the same may repeat for their children. Now, you can play a role. You can step up to help those families break out from the poverty cycle by not just giving them money, not just giving them support, but also giving them your time. Now, what's important is before we help anyone, we need to first understand their needs. What we can do today to help the underprivileged is first to identify the needy in your community. So it could be people living in your neighborhood, near your HDB. Now, if you don't live at the HDB, it could be at the hawker center. It could also be in your school, a cleaner or whatsoever. But please, so what you could do is you could refer them to the CC, Community Center, or the CDCs or whatsoever. And also maybe you could kind of accompany them to see your local MP. But before you bring them, please ask them for permission. You need to build a rapport. You can't just drag them like that, all right? Okay, so secondly, what you could do, if you could join programs to mentor children and youths. For children, it is very meaningful because you would be a sense of, you'll be a pillar of strength. You would be a motivation for them. Because you see, they do not have positive influences in their life. So if you're there, you're spending time to teach them tuition, you are the reason for them to excel in their studies. For the teenagers or those who are studying in the IHLs, you would basically encourage them to upgrade their skills and upgrade themselves academically. And this goes a very long way to help them through the upward social mobility, and this will help them to break out the poverty cycle. Now, I hope that I have been, that I've managed to open your eyes to the criticalities and the needs of our community and society. I hope that my talk has somewhat inspired or convinced you to volunteer and make a difference in the lives of the underprivileged. Let's not leave anyone behind in this. We all have to play our part if we want to make Singapore a livable home for everyone. Thank you.